Welcome to the webinar. This is Richie. So in most organizations, there seems to be a consensus that it makes sense to have the majority of your data in the cloud and do all your computations in the cloud, since it solves many of the problems with scaling and with collaboration. The tricky part is that you need to be a bit careful about your cloud setup just to ensure that the right employees have the right access to resources and that you don't overspend on services. So there's some level of monitoring required there. That means that today we're going to discuss data governance and we're going to be focusing on the Microsoft Azure cloud platform. Our guest is Anneleen Rummens. So she's a data scientist with a background in statistics and social sciences, and she currently works as a freelance data scientist in finance, and she's also studying a postgraduate degree in applied AI. Anneleen is also the instructor of 4 data camp courses, one of our top instructors, and that includes the course Azure Management and Governance, which is very topical for today. So with that, please take it away, Anneleen.
Thank you, Richie, for the introduction. So hello, everyone. Very happy to be here to explain some of the basics of data governance in Azure for you. So yeah, with that, let's take it away and start with the slides. So what we will see in this webinar. So we'll focus mainly on the basic concepts, and also I will show you some tools and features you can use in Azure. First, I will explain some of the basic concepts, but I will try to keep it brief so we can really, for the greater part of this webinar, focus on really getting hands-on with Azure and its features. We're going to talk about cost management, to stay on top of your costs, resource management, governance and compliance, and finally also monitoring in Azure. If you would like to follow along, you can do so with a free Azure account. You can follow along right now with the webinar or later with the recording. If you go to the link, you can sign up there. If you already have a Microsoft account, an Outlook email address, for example, you can just sign in and then you will have access. Keep in mind that for the free account, you will have to give up credit card information. You will not be charged right now, but you will be asked to give up credit cards. You will, with the free account, you will get $200 in credits and free access to most of Azure services for 12 months. If you are a student, you have another option. You can go to the student offer. There you get the same, so also credit and free access, but you don't have to give up your credit card information in that case. You need to register with an academic email address, and then you can make use of that offer. That's also interesting. While you are setting up that, we can continue with the basic concepts. So to start off, Azure, what is Azure? It's a main cloud platform by Microsoft. It's used for all kinds of things, data storage in the cloud, web applications, also AI, big data analytics and machine learning in the cloud. And Azure is especially known for its flexibility, scalability, and of course, its integration with other Microsoft products, for example, Power BI. Basics of cost management in Azure. So the main pricing model in Azure is pay-as-you-go. This means that you only pay for what you use. So that's a big advantage. However, the other side is then that you also need to manage your costs very carefully and stay on top of things to avoid having a surprise invoice at the end of the month. It's also the case that Azure will usually by default offer you premium options for your resources and your services, and you don't always need that. So you really need to think about what you need and also, keep those costs in mind. Luckily, we have a lot of tools in Azure we can use to help us with that. Some of the things we're going to see is, for example, cost estimation beforehand with the pricing calculator, but also the setup of budgets and budget alerts. And coming to resource management, so if you don't really know what a resource is actually a general term for any manageable item in Azure. This can be a database, a web application, a virtual machine, or also a compute cluster for machine learning. And those resources are managed in Azure with services. An example of a service that we're going to see later is, for example, cost management, Azure policy, or Azure monitoring. So for resource management, we're especially going to focus on management of performance and costs. Cost is for cost management in Azure, and performance is more part of Azure Monitor. We will see both later on in the hands-on exercises. We have several tools as well for resource management, resource templates, so we can, if we have to reuse a lot of resources, we can use templates to easily do that. And also resource tags. Resource tags are kind of labels, and they are very handy to categorize the resources, and also for using other services, for example, for cost management and for monitor, we can really focus on specific groups of resources as well with the tags. And then the logs, those are especially used if you have critical resources and you wish to protect them. You can set up a log so that they cannot be deleted or cannot be modified. But we will also see that in a bit. And then governance and compliance. So we'll mainly focus on governance examples as well in this webinar. You have several tasks, data protection, risk management, and also documenting and reporting according to specific regulations. And these are all things that Azure can help with. The main tools in Azure are Azure Policy, which we will see, also the Service Trust Portal, which is actually a kind of documentation center where you can find all the details about the policies that Microsoft uses, and also more information about specific regulations around the world. And then we also have more advanced features in Azure, Microsoft Purview, and the Compliance Manager. And then finally, monitoring in Azure. So in Azure, you can basically collect and analyze metrics and logs about anything you do in Azure. So metrics, those are mainly for resources. So we can, for example, see are resources available. If you have a storage account or a database, do we still have enough storage space for all our data, and so on. Logs is used for all activities in Azure. So, for example, if you create a resource, if you remove a resource, or if data is sent automatically to a resource, all those things leave a trace in the logs. And you can also analyze logs to, for example, track errors or any problems you have. One main advantage as well of Azure Monitor is that you can also use it for proactive or automatic monitoring and alerts. So if you really like to dive deep into the metrics, you can do so. But if you would like more that Azure warns you if there is a specific problem, you can also set that up. And we will also see that later, how we can do that in Azure Monitor. Azure Monitor is actually a big platform and consists of three main parts. Application Insights, which is used to check on your applications. So, for example, you could set up data storage in Azure, send it to a machine learning model, and then send the results of the model to a web application so that users can see the results of that, for example. And then with Application Insights, you can follow if the web application is available to the users, to avoid downtime, for example, to avoid errors, and all those kind of things. Log Analytics is for the logs. So if you wish to check on errors, for example, that have happened with the resources, activities by specific users, all those kind of things you can find with the logs. And then finally, alerts. That is what you will use to set up the proactive monitoring and automatic alerts. So that's it for the basic concepts. I don't know if there already are any questions we can tackle right now. If not, we can move on to Azure itself.
Yeah, I don't think we have any questions from the audience yet. If you do have any questions for Anneleen, please do ask them in the chat, and then we'll get to them later. All right, so I think for now we can have a look at the site itself.
Okay. Move on to Azure itself. Okay. So once you open up Azure, you arrive here. This is the portal. It's basically the homepage of Azure. And here you can find recently used services or resources. So if you already have resources, you will find them here. If you don't have any resources, this will be empty. Once you start using services, they will also appear here. But if you need a specific service, you can also always find them here, the left. You can set up favorites if you want. And of course, you can also use a search bar. So the search bar is also very interesting because you can not only use it to search for services, but also for documentation. So for example, if you want to know more about cost management, voilà. So then we see also documentation to see, for example, what can Microsoft Cost Management do. But for now, let's focus on cost management as our first service we're going to look at. So one of the first things that we usually would like to do if you want to set up a project in Azure is do a cost estimation. And an important tool to help you, that is a pricing calculator. So we can see it here at the bottom. So we'll open up the pricing calculator. This is a separate link. So you can also use the URL here to access it and to start with the pricing calculator. So to see the pricing calculator in products, we can add products and then view an estimate of how much it will cost every month in Azure. So for example, for governance, some important services are Azure Policy. Get that in. There we go. And also review. And then you can see both have appeared here in our estimate. So to start with, Azure Policy is the basic service to set up policies, of course, in Azure. This will be your go-to for basic governance and data management. For more advanced applications, you will need Microsoft Purview. Microsoft Purview allows you to manage multiple data assets, to set up a data map, a data catalog, and also to set up data lineages and to view the data flows throughout Azure, for example. You can see immediately that Azure Policy, of course, is a bit cheaper than our Microsoft Purview. Azure Policy is part of the free resources as well for the free account. Microsoft Purview is not part of that. So typically, if Azure Policy is enough, Azure Policy is your go-to. If you want to know also some more information about a certain product, for example, what can Microsoft Purview do? You can click here on the information icon and see some more details. For example, product details will send us to the page, the product page of Microsoft, and we get an overview of what we can do. So for example, the data map feature. Also some extra features for sensitive data, and so on. Moving back to the pricing calculator, we can also easily change any of the options based on what we need. So for example, if you see a data policy, policies in Microsoft Purview are mainly used for access management. So if you already know, we have about 3 groups of access rights that we need to create, then you can add them here, and then they will be added to the price. Then, and afterwards, we can export it to Excel, save it. You can also change the currency here. So this was an example for individual products, but it's also possible to look at scenarios. So these are more large-scale architectural solutions for typical scenarios. So for example, if we look at machine learning, get some more information of a proposed solution, start with data ingestion, you can go to Power BI, to machine learning, and then eventually to web application. If you now clear the estimate here and add this, then you will see that will automatically add in all the products that were shown here in the picture. And then we can change it as much as we want. So for example, we could say, well, we don't really need Power BI because we're using Tableau. We can delete it here, and then we only have those services left. And then, of course, we can see the price here. It's also interesting if you are interested in a solution here. Oops, wrong button. Make it a bit larger here. Then we click here. We can click here, and then we'll get some more information about this solution. So that could also help you to set up your own solution as well and to learn what you really need for that. Okay, so that's it for the pricing calculator. The next thing I would like to show is how to set up a budget and a budget alert. So if you are in cost management, we can go to budgets here. Takes a while to load. Okay. Then we can add a budget. Well, it shows the use of the past months. Say, for example, we want to have a budget for our free credits. Free credit is 200. Okay, you can set it up. And then you set up the alert. For example, I'd like to be warned if you already used 50% of our budgets. Then we can edit that like this, and then add an email address to send the alert to. You can change the language of the alert to any you want. You can also choose to either go for the actual use of your budget or to the forecasted use, which is the use you will likely have in the next month. So in that case, you will be warned earlier if you go over your budget. Okay. Okay, for the next exercise, we're first going to create a resource. Click here, create resource. And one of the easiest resources to create is a storage account. This is used to store your data, of course. For example, you can use it to store text data, images, and that kind of things inside Azure, and to use them later for example, for machine learning. So for a storage account, not many things we need to fill in. We need to make sure we have a subscription and a resource group here, and a name we can use. Give it a number for an extra ID. Most of these is already filled in by default. And then for redundancy, here we see an example of Azure actually proposing a more premium option that we really need. So redundancy is important for critical data. This basically controls how many backups you have of your data. So if you have non-critical data, you'll have enough with a locally redundant storage. If you do have critical data, you can use any of the other options. So how it works is like this. So Azure is organized in different regions. So for example, West Europe, East US, and your account is in the main region, typically the region you're also located in. And you can use the redundant storage options to basically back up your data, not only in the region where you're at, but also in a different region as an extra precaution. to avoid the loss of critical data. But typically, for non-critical data, locally redundant storage will be enough. If you click on Review and Create, and this accounts for every resource, Azure will do validation. And if we forgot any important option or any required option, then Azure will tell us so. It's going to take a while. There we go. So we get an overview of all the options we have here. You can also make it into a template if you would like to reuse it later. And once we are happy, can click Create, and our storage account is created. Okay, here we go. You do need to wait sometimes for deployment and for validation as well. Okay, here we go. We can immediately go to the resource. Okay, and one of the things that's really interesting as well, as I said previously, is the tags. So those are used to basically categorize your resources. If you don't have a lot of resources, it's not really necessary, but once you start to use a lot of project on Azure and a lot of resources, it comes really in handy to use the tags to keep track of your resources also in other services like cost management or monitor. So for example, you can create a project tag and say, for example, this is part of an AI chatbot. So tags always come with two parts. So you have first the name. It's actually the more general category. So if you create another resource, we can also give it a project tag, and then the value is the more specific value of our category. So in this case, project is the AI chatbot. Applied. Okay, there we go. And then also interesting to manage resources are the logs. For that, we go a little bit lower on settings. We have logs. So logs are especially interesting for critical resources. So say we have data that's really, really necessary for a chatbot, and without it, the chatbot would work. We can consider to add a log, so to avoid that it can be deleted or modified. Can, for example, call it a critical resource. And then the log notes, we can give a description here of what kind of log it is and what it's used for. It's completely optional. The log type, we have two types, read-only or delete. Read-only means that the resource is protected against modifications, so you can only read it. And delete means that the resource is protected against deletion. So once we apply this log, this resource cannot be deleted until we remove the log. So you can use this permanently for critical resources, or also in case you need to protect certain resources temporarily, for example, during maintenance, also possible to just apply the log during maintenance. Okay. So to illustrate this, if we now try to delete the resource, there we go. Then we have a warning that there has been a delete log applied to this resource, and we cannot delete it until it's removed. Okay, moving on to the governance and compliance part. So, as I said previously, Azure Policy is an important service to use for this. So, open that up. So policy, as the name already said, can set up policies, and we can also check whether our resources are compliant with the policies we've made. Now, in this case, there are no policies, so obviously all our resources are compliant. But once we have multiple policies here, we can also see if our current resources are already compliant with our policies. So, for an example, let's assign a policy. The scope, that's the subscription we're working with. So it's possible in Azure to have multiple subscriptions. Mainly the case if you're really working with different projects, but typically we'll only have one. But if you have multiple, you can change the scope here. You can also exclude resources if necessary. And then the policy definition. So one of the advantages we have in Azure is that Azure also provides some built-in policies we can use. There we go. So for example, we could require a tag for resources so that every resource has a tag. Okay, you can add a description if we want. Policy enforcement, we can disable it temporarily if needed. The most important settings here, so advanced, not really necessary to do anything here. Tag name, so we've just set up a policy to require a tag, so we need to give the name to the tag. Say, for example, we want to require a data classification tag for each resource so that we know that, okay, this resource works with sensitive data, so we need to take more control over these resources or apply certain security rules. So we can easily identify those resources with tag. Data classification. Okay. Then the next tab is remediation. This basically says what happens if our current resources do not really have the policy yet. So the resource we created earlier does not have this tag. We can make sure that it does apply this tag, or we can do it ourselves later. The non-compliance message is what you see if the policy, if your resource is not compliant to the policy. So you can, for example, say to make it a bit more clear what is happening here. Okay, and then we can review everything you set here and create it. It'll take a while before we can see here what happens with our current resources. So for now, it will stay here. But say, for example, we would create a new resource, second storage account. Same settings, and if we try to create it like this, then we get validation failed because we did not make a tag for data classification. And go back to tags, and then we know data classification, for example, say it's sensitive. And now we can create our resource. Another thing we can do with policy is create initiatives. Initiatives are a group of policies. And here again, we have some built-in initiatives that basically for specific regulations. So, for example, let's say that we want to follow the UK official and UK NHS compliance. Then we can basically add this. There we go. Say you would like to know more about this initiative, you can also search for it here. There we go. And then you can see the documentation. And clicking here will bring you again to the documentation. You can also see what kind of policies are included here. By going through the tabs. Oh, here we go. So these are all the policies that are related to this initiative. So, for example, multi-factor authentication needs to be enabled on different accounts. Kind of example do we have here again? Yeah, Azure Defender needs to be enabled. Apps should only be accessible over protected URL and so on. So, and you can also adapt this if you want. So you can basically include or exclude different policies to adapt it to your own requirements. View and create. And then it's created as well. So we see now that our first policy has appeared. It has not yet been tested on our current resources yet. And this is an example of a log. So we can see here that when we try to create the second resource, we had a deny action because of the policy. It's also interesting. So here we have again the built-in policies in Azure or the initiatives. If we go back to, okay, here we go. So now we see 100% compliance for both our initiative and our policy we've made. You can also edit the assignments if you want to make some changes. It's also possible to use code, so JSON code, to change it directly there to have more control over specific options as well. And then one other thing I would like to show as well is Service Trust Portal. This is basically the main portal for Microsoft, where they document and show all their the policies they apply as well, but also documentation about specific regulations around the world, for example, GDPR and others as well, and any kind of resources. So if you would like to look up more documentation, if you are a bit stuck with certain compliances, you can look it up here as well. That's also quite an interesting tool to use here as well. So it's also a bit more in general, so not only Azure, but also other Microsoft products. Okay. Going back to Azure. And then lastly, the advisor is also quite interesting. So what advisor does is you have those categories, 5 categories, and it will basically give you automatic recommendations based on what you have in Azure, for example, for cost, for security, reliability, operational excellence, basically a specific framework by Microsoft to optimize the use of Azure and performance as well. So right now we don't really have any specific recommendations, but it's really very interesting to take a look at here as well, as it will really also help you with optimizing those different aspects of Azure. So if we go to a specific part, we normally then see here a list of the different recommendations. Okay, and that's it for the demonstration here. Going to stop sharing. So time for questions.
Sorry, I just realized on mute there. Anyway, thank you for that. I've not played around with Azure much myself, so that was really fascinating to learn about all the different tools. It seems like it's very sort of clean to use, like everything's sort of point and click and straightforward. But the one thing that gets me is that there's hundreds of different Azure services, and I get a bit lost about like what's the most important thing. So can you talk me through, I guess since your background is data science, what are the most important Azure services for data scientists?
Well, we didn't cover it in this webinar, but typically, if you work a lot with data and machine learning, then you're going to use, for example, for data, we have Azure Synapse. It will help you with data analytics, data storage as well. You can also use services like Databricks. So Databricks inside of Azure, actually, Data Factory is another one for data as well. And then if you move on more to machine learning, you have a specific service for machine learning as well. Azure Machine Learning is the name.
It's very much in the title, Azure Machine Learning. It's straightforward, at least. You know what you're getting. Okay, so that's interesting. So there's a lot of it's around data storage, data warehousing, and then machine learning services as well. And because we've been talking about data governance, this is one of those things where it kind of moves around a little bit from organization to organization. So who would be responsible for using all those tools that you've talked about today? Like who needs to be doing data governance in Azure within an organization? Like which teams or which roles?
I think it can depend a bit also on the team as well, but a data protection officer, for example, could assist with this. If it's more related to the data itself, data engineering team could be responsible as well. In my experience, it changes a bit depending on the organization and team. Sometimes it's also managed by the IT team, for example. So there are multiple possibilities. Azure is designed to be easy to use, but as you said, there are a lot of services, there are a lot of options. So you really need to focus in on your domain and then learn the different options you have there and the different tools there are.
Okay, so it sounds like basically there can be quite a lot of different teams and different roles across the organization that can need to use some Azure services, but probably not everyone needs to know absolutely everything. That sounds about right. Okay, so today we're using the point and click interface, but there's also a command line interface as well. So when might you want to use the point and click web interface versus the command line interface?
So it really comes down to preference. So command line interface, of course, you need to be able to code. You have different options for the command line interface. I think PowerShell or Bash. You use it especially if you want a bit more control over the different options. And if you want to edit, for example, the templates of, for example, a policy or a resource template as well, then it comes really in handy. If you're not really into coding, then you usually just use UI, Azure Portal, and then just point and click, especially.
Okay, so if you're setting up like thousands of virtual machines, you're probably going to want to do it in code. But for if you're just setting up one, then probably point and click. Okay.
Indeed.
All right. Nice. So we've got a load of questions from the audience now. So well done, audience, for asking all these questions. So this first question comes from Amir. So Amir just wants to know a bit more about like the budget tool that you showed. So there it was about setting like a price limit, and then I think there's something about sending alerts when you were reaching the limit. Do you just want to go into a bit more depth on that?
Yeah, it's basically a tool that helps you manage costs. So, for example, you say, okay, this project's monthly budget is that amount. You can set it up. So what it then does is then you can, at the end of the month, for example, see, oh, did it go over budget? You can set up alerts, as we've seen as well, so that when it goes over budget, you are warned as well. So it's basically a tool to help you manage the budget.
Okay, yeah, better to know you're spending too much money rather than
Indeed.
being shouted at by someone in finance. All right, so Matthew asks, is there anything in Azure policy to assist with documentation? So data lineage is just about like knowing where that particular version of your data set came from and how things have changed. So yeah, can you do data lineage with Azure policy, or do you need Microsoft Purview? So Purview is another service, right?
Yeah. So you could use Azure Policy, but would be easier with Microsoft Purview. So what Microsoft Purview does it automizes a lot more things and makes it a lot easier as well to follow up on data lineage. In Azure Policy, you have to likely do a lot of things more manually, search for it and that. So if you want the easy way, then you're going to have to use Microsoft Purview.
Okay, so it sounds like it's possible, but probably best to use the right tool, the right job. Okay. Next question from Lorena. So Lorena asks, is it possible to create a policy to limit the quantity of branches per user? I'm not sure what branches are in this context. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but you can basically do almost anything with Azure Policy. So yeah, I think you can do that as well. You can definitely put on some more limits on what users can do, for example. So yeah.
Okay, and next one from Rashmi. How can we get a data governance related policy applied and then track it against data storage? So I guess, yeah, can you have a policy for data storage? I'm not sure what exactly you'd be tracking, maybe how much storage you're using, something like that.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. You would use Azure Policy to track, for example, if your storage is compliant with the policies you've set. So if you set up a data governance policy, you can then use Azure Policy to track its compliance. If you're more looking to check the performance of a storage account, then you would go to Azure Monitor.
Okay, so you've got the right tool. It's just a question of using whether you do it in policy or the monitor for that. Okay, all right. So next question comes from Siddharth. Can we also use Python in Azure?
Yes, it's possible to use Python with Jupyter notebooks, for example. You can use those in Azure Synapse or in Azure Machine Learning, for example, to do all your data analytics or machine learning modeling.
It's tricky. Yes, it's a data lab rival there. So Microsoft, yeah, they've got their own Azure notebooks. I don't think they're as nice as data lab notebooks, but if you're working in Azure anyway, then you're probably going to want to write your Python where your data is. Okay, so next one comes from Ike saying, what advantages does Azure have over AWS? we're going to start a war here, I think, but go on.
Yeah, I think it's the choice Azure over AWS is basically a personal choice. I think a preference for what you really need. I think one of the advantages you could have with Azure over AWS is the fact that it integrates with other Microsoft products. So if you're already using Power BI and would like an easy integration with your cloud platform, then it will be easier with Azure, for example.
Okay, I think
because of course they're both from Microsoft. So
yeah, this is probably one of those decisions that needs made at an organizational level, because you don't want to be using many different cloud services. You want like all your things on Azure or all your things on AWS or GCP or whatever. And I feel like at this point, all these big cloud providers, they've got so many services. You're probably going to be able, like whichever one you pick, it's probably going to be good enough, right? It's going to be able to do what you want. Is that the sort of sense you get as well, Anneleen?
indeed, yeah.
So they're fairly mature.
Yeah, indeed. Those are the two big players, and then I think you're going to get everything you need for both. It's really just preference for which one you would like to use.
Yeah. All right. Next one comes from Christiane saying, what are the common challenges faced while implementing data governance in Azure? Yeah, what goes wrong?
Yeah, good question. You get a lot of support from Azure to implement those policies and data governance tasks, but you really need to have a good idea of what you want to do and the kind of data you have beforehand. That also comes down to those multiple options and services you have. So you can do a lot of things in Azure, but to really get control over, for example, your data governance, you really need to know what you want to do and what you want to protect beforehand. So if suppose you're working in a small team and nobody really has the knowledge or experience about data governance, then you will get lost in Azure as well. So it really comes down to knowing what you want and knowing what you need. That's definitely a common challenge I see. Because of course, for example, Microsoft offers support for different types of regulations, but then you also need to know which regulation applies to your data, for example.
Okay, so if you got some very private data, so I guess financial data or personal information, then that's going to have different rules applied to it. To just I don't know, something that's less sensitive.
So yeah, you do have a lot of options to protect your data in Azure, but it's up to you to designate your data, for example, as sensitive or as non-sensitive or critical or non-critical, and then choosing the right option to go with it. And that's definitely a big chance in Azure because you need to be experienced, first of all, with data governance itself and what you need from that, and with the options in Azure itself. So if you don't really know that before and you're going to really start learning about it and use the documentation and so on to find your way, actually. It's the best way I can say it.
Okay, yeah, it does seem like because there's so many different services, so many different options within those services, that you probably need to spend quite a lot of time reading documentation. And of course, take the DataCamp course, take Anneleen's DataCamp course to help you get you started. Actually, on that note, because there is a lot to learn, do you have a sense of where people should start? Like, what should be like the first service or the first sort of task, like something simple that people can get going with?
Well, actually, in the courses from the Azure Fundamentals track, if you do the exercises there, you can also do them in a special Azure environment on DataCamp as well. So one of the first things you're probably going to learn is to create a resource in Azure, because a resource is the core of Azure. For example, create a virtual machine or create a storage account. Those are relatively simple resources to create. And then then it's a question of what kind of tasks you want to do in Azure. If you are especially interested in governance, then I would definitely recommend going to Azure Policy and try that out. try to create a policy, for example, look through the built-in definitions, the built-in initiatives, and so on. Yeah.
Okay. So back to, we've got a few more audience questions, which I think can take us through to time. So Mikey asks, are there any recommended professional certifications for AWS or Azure for a budding data analyst?
I think they have both a lot of certifications. So, for example, Azure has the Azure Fundamentals certification. The fundamentals track on data can prepare for this certification. This is a more general certification. Yeah, that shows that you have the basics of Azure. I think there's also a specific certification for data analyst in Azure, and I think for AWS it's the same, so that you can have a specific certification for data analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because Microsoft and Amazon, they're huge. They've got very comprehensive certification things. So the Azure Fundamentals track on Data Camp. So it's a series of, I think, 4 courses. 4 courses. And that prepares you for the AZ 900 exam, which is like the getting started with Azure certification. All right. Jorge asks, can I have an auto scan from a Power BI dashboard and Azure analysis services in order to have data lineage? That's a technical question. I don't know. What do you know?
I don't know the specifics of this, but I think that Microsoft Purview does offer those kind of tools to do automatic scanning, for example. So in that case, you would have to go to Purview.
All right. So can you just explain what auto scan is for everyone who doesn't know?
Well, the way I understand it is that it automatically scans your data in Power BI or Azure Analysis Services to create to help you create data lineage to follow the flow of the data through your cloud platform, for example, from ingesting the data to, for example, a model and then to Power BI, for example.
Okay, so you don't have to sort of manually work out how your data is moving through these different services. It's just sort of all created for you automatically.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. All right, one more question, and then we've got a few notices. So Eshwa asks, can we use Azure as per the code pen to check the API results? I'm not sure what is that code. Is that a security thing? Code pen?
I'm not familiar with CodePen either, but I do know that you can connect an API to Azure as well to, for example, get the data from your API into Azure. So that's definitely a possibility if that is the meaning of the question.
Okay, all right. Little ambiguous there. Let's do 1 or 2 more, just and then we will wrap up. Okay, so hang on, we've done certifications. Final question then. So Emer asks, can we connect Azure with a website database running data analysis and machine learning?
Yes, that's possible.
It's just straightforward. Yes, you can. Yeah, I think Azure basically will connect to any other.
Yeah, you can connect to almost anything with Azure. So it is definitely a common use case.
All right, wonderful. Okay, so before everyone dashes off, on June 26th and 27th, we've got a virtual conference. So 2 days, it's going to be pretty epic. We've got more than 20,000 people signed up already. It's going to be huge. Ton of great speakers. So you can sign up for the Radar conference. So if you have a look at the QR code on the screen, you can register for it through there. And then we've got some upcoming webinars as well. So what's the next one coming along? So on the 19th, we've got a session on creating data pipelines with Airflow. On the 20th, it's me and my colleague Adele talking about the state of data and AI literacy. So lots of good survey results there from data leaders and AI leaders about what's important in their business. And then Actually, I'm hoping to have a Euro 2024 session as well. So hopefully we'll have a nice soccer themed webinar coming up for you very soon. Okay, so with that, thank you, Anneleen. I feel like I learned a lot in this session. It's been very, very informative just seeing how you can play around with all these Azure tools. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Thank you to Reese for moderating. Thank you to everyone who asked a question. Well done on all those questions. I'm very impressed, audience. That was brilliant. And yeah, thank you to everyone who showed up. I hope to see you all again in future webinars and at the Radar conference at the end of this month.